Hello everybody, Brian Pickle here, and whether you're new or returning, welcome to Sunset Mirage, my Vanilla City Skylines build. So as usual, I would just like to do a really quick recap of what we did in last episode, and that was make this really beautiful lakeside marina and leisure waterfront area. So again, I would like to give a massive thank you to Imperator for the inspiration for the sort of layout and the final configuration, the design for this build. I tried for a long time to try to figure out how I wanted it to look, and saw his episode where he did a similar thing, and I was like, that is exactly what I had in mind. So thanks again for that. But moving away, back to the other side of the freeway, I'd like to come back over towards our university, and I would like to start expanding, I guess, the university town, essentially. So I'm going to throw in some residential on this side, but the main part of the build today is going to be a concert venue. I personally love concerts. I like going to festivals, so I was really pleased with the concert venue pack. I don't think that's a particularly popular opinion, but I enjoy the pack. So I wanted to use it in today's build. So what I'm doing here is just laying out the sort of main road that will house the actual concert venue asset itself. It was giving me a little bit of trouble with the angles there, but I managed it in the end. So this main road, again, is what's going to house the asset itself. So if we go into the Unique Buildings tab and then go over to concert venues, that is where you find the asset. And then in between the two rail tracks is going to be the area that will actually have the concert grounds, the festival grounds, so to speak. So again, just going into the Unique Buildings tab and grabbing the asset, it's underneath the concert venues. So, and then what I want to do is try to centralize it with this main road. And it does actually, thankfully, end up working out perfectly well with 10 tiles on either end of the asset. Now, though, because this asset currently is facing that main road, which faces into the train tracks, it's not an ideal placement for this asset. It's not the ideal orientation. So what I want to do is draw out some dirt road frames to flip it around. And so I'm just going to draw out a little bit of extra space on either ends of this so that I don't interfere with the building by accident and I get the measurements properly so that it fits directly in that box. Then I'll just trim off the extra roads from either side. And then what I want to do is, sticking with our dirt roads to create this festival area, I want to draw out a little bit of space on either end of the asset. And in here, what I would like to do is make a sort of food hall. Typically at a festival, you'll see lots of food stalls, food trucks that have just the wildest kinds of food amenities. I think the weirdest food that I ever personally saw at a festival was a lobster corn dog. And I can't remember if I actually tried it or not, but that was definitely the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So yeah, here I'm trying to make sure that both sides have the same distance so that everything fits the same and that it looks symmetrical, I guess. It was giving me a little bit of a hard time. I had an issue with forgetting to turn the proper snappings off, and I just couldn't get it to align right, especially with that corner, that little curve there was really throwing things off. But eventually I got it in the end, and it is completely symmetrical on either side of the actual asset. Then I finally turned it around so that the entry point is on that dirt road instead of on the main road, and now it faces how we're looking at it now. Like, that's where people will look at it from, not from the direction of the train tracks on the other side. So much better orientation, but it still looks just a little bit bare or maybe incomplete. The asset itself is relatively small and not really realistic of like what a festival grounds looks like. So a fun little trick to do is to actually create like a park area. The reason I used a park area specifically instead of just using park assets is so that I don't have to have things connected to actual roads. So I go ahead here and create a national park area so that I have access to some of the tents. So what I'm doing here is just like taking the main path with decorations so that has the lights on it and drawing it straight out sort of right from the center of the concert venue asset and out of the park gate. And then I want to sort of create like an open air theater seating area it would have been really cool to have it be actually, like, tiered, like you would probably see in a real open-air theater. But the terrain on this map was giving me enough of a headache as it was. I didn't even want to begin trying to look at that. So here I'm just drawing out with then the regular path without decorations, what will essentially be the seating areas. And I'm just drawing them out in like a slight curve, equal distant on each side, and then I just kind of go in decreasing amounts, decreasing length for each new seating area, leaving enough space in between for some of the tents and a couple other decoration sort of assets. And so that gives us all 4 of our sort of tiered seating aisles, essentially. And I think the park gate is small enough where it's not going to get in the way of people seeing. I mean, I know people aren't actually watching the concert from those tents, but for immersion purposes, I didn't want the other park gate was like way too big. It would have like completely blocked the view. So anyway, again, all in our imagination, of course. These people aren't actually watching it from these tents. But then what I do is go through and just expand that park area so that I can start placing in the assets on those paths the way that I want them to be. Because without the park area, they have to be put on actual roads, which is nice for putting them in lots of other places of the city, but I really wanted to be able to have it be with the assets on the actual pathways for the park. So I needed the actual park area. Then with the park area all the way filled out, what I do is go ahead into that parks tab and grab the largest tent. And another thing that's pretty typical at like a festival is that you have suites, and a lot of them do have tents. I think Coachella and Bonnaroo are most known for having tents and more of like a camping vibe. I've only ever been to Lollapalooza, and you don't camp there. But typically, if you have like VIP seats or something like that, you have a tent. So I wanted to play around with that idea. So I took the largest tents and placed them at the front. Like, those are the ones that you paid the most for, so you get closer to the front. You have a nicer tent, maybe with like a full bed and couch. I don't know, fancy things inside. And then I sort of just decrease in size the farther we go back and increase in amounts of them, right? So the next row had like the second biggest tent, and then the back row has all those little tiny tents. And so I thought that just sort of completed the vibe of like, okay, so this is the VIP seating area, or this is the viewing area. And then, so for now, that's all the decoration in this area that I want to do. I will, of course, go back through and detail it up in the detailing time-lapse. But before getting into all of that, I just want to complete the build itself and then go through and do all those details. So what I do here is, like I was saying earlier about having like a sort of food court or something with all the food stalls and drink tents and things like that. What I do here is just create a regular district, and then so the green cities commercial zones, the organic and local produce, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, organic and local produce. They come with some very cool tent-like assets. You do have to be very particular in the way that you zone them in so that you actually get that specific asset. But even still, there's quite a few of them that fit this vibe. But I was looking for one in particular, a very specific asset. And so that asset comes in a 1x4. And I think it's got about 4 tents kind of right in a row. And if you line them up side by side and put paths in between them, they make for a very, very convincing food court or like food hall dining area for a concert venue kind of thing. Again, I always forget about the goddamn water, so here I am just placing those pipes down. I know that not everybody is a fan of the messy pipes. People like them to be under the roads where they belong, but luckily in City Skylines 2, we won't have to worry about that anymore. They come in like that on their own. But yes, back to the task at hand. If you put the paths in between here, like I'm doing now, it creates like a sort of walkway kind of area that you would see in a... I'm trying to think of a better word for food hall. It's not really quite a food hall because it's outside, but essentially that's what it is. Essentially it's a food court. So I actually like this asset. It wasn't the one that I was actually looking for, but it kind of serves the same purpose. It looks a little bit more upscale than maybe something that you would see at a concert venue or a festival of sorts. Because they look like actual full buildings and not just tents. But it still fits with the vibe well enough that I just left it at that. I figured it would take so long using vanilla to actually get the proper asset in. I wasn't going to be super picky about it. But yeah, so then so on either side of the actual concert venue asset, I go through with these 1x4 areas trying to get that specific asset in. And it does take quite a long time. So it does take just a little bit of patience and a lot of whack-a-mole of just like deleting assets as they pop in if you don't get the right one. And then here I'm having another goddamn fight with that stupid zoning tool. I can never get it to zone the right side of the road that I want it to. So I ran into problems with that, but I didn't want the buildings to be growing on this road that I'm trying to upgrade. So I kept getting like a bunch of 1x1 assets growing in instead, or like 2x1s. And I really wanted them to be growing on the other road. So I will say that if you don't really have the patience to do that and to fight with it and just sit there and wait for the right asset to grow in, what you can do if you are on PC is if you download the Find It mod, you can actually filter and sort through specific zoning types and specialty types to find very specific assets, and then you can just plop it in instead of like letting it grow. So I definitely recommend it if you are the impatient sort. It's much, much easier to do it that way. And I think at the end of it, I end up just placing it anyway, doing with the Find It mod, but it can be done in vanilla. It just takes a little bit more time. Then over on this side, what I wanted to do was sort of bring in, oh god, and I forgot the frickin' that goddamn zoning tool, man. It's really great in theory, but I have a hard time getting it to do what I want to do, and I always forget to turn it back on once I've finished using it. So anyway, what I wanted to do over on this side is create like a sort of service area for the concert venue. If you have ever been to one before, you'll know that lots of people enjoy them a little bit too much. Or perhaps they don't enjoy them at all because they are on another planet. So I wanted to get in a medical clinic. Typically at concert venues, obviously you will have like a medical tent, an emergency tent if anything goes wrong. Places where you can get water, people get dehydrated constantly. So that's sort of all I wanted to do over here. I wanted to create a little bit of a service area. So I go ahead and I grab the med clinic like I mentioned, and also a police station for good measure. I do leave out the fire station because I have a high capacity fire helicopter depot right next door already. I was originally going to move that asset somewhere else just because I had really only thrown it in as a emergency measure. But I ended up just keeping it there, and I think it's there to stay. Then I just go through and place a little bit of parking for these service buildings. And, oh yes, I also use the airport hangar to kind of flush it out a little bit more and get rid of some of the dirt space and make it like its own dedicated area. Typically you would find something like sort of fenced off, and ideally you would have like tents. So that's actually what I ended up doing here, because obviously you don't really find whole buildings at like a festival. It's usually in some sort of park or something. So what I wanted to do was get tents. So I just got a dirt road and I just dragged it out using only the angle snapping so that I could get it to go far but not connect to the other road, because I didn't want to have too many junctions on this road. I just wanted enough space to get a couple tents in there to serve as like a medical tent. But yeah, that's really all I was going for with this, and it still looks a little bit funny, but with a little bit of imagination you can sort of imagine that it's it's a medical tent. The area where you would go if you get dehydrated or if you get sick or if you get hurt. All those kinds of things happen constantly at concerts. So I thought it was an appropriate place to put it, and it addresses services on this side of the railroad tracks, and will serve our new suburb that we will also eventually build in here. And again, there you can see that I'm just kind of playing whack-a-mole with those buildings as I go, trying to find that particular asset that I'm looking for. So far, of course, none of them have grown in. But in the meantime, I figured now was as good a time as any to start actually building that suburb. So we definitely need some more residential expansion in the city before we reach our next milestone. I think, yeah, so we're at about 23,000 people, and I want to say it's 32,000 that we need before the next tile opens up. And we still have plenty of space in the city for residential expansion where we don't really need that next tile. It's really just because the plans that I have for the city require some of those tiles. So I would really like to start doing some residential expansion and getting to those next milestones so that I can move on to some of the parts of the city that are very incomplete at this moment, and that need that other tile to expand into. But yeah, so for this area, I left it pretty simple. I wanted to get essentially back to basics with the residential stuff over here. For the past couple of episodes, we had done some fun stuff with the keys and the tiers in that luxury suburb. So I just wanted to keep it simple coming back over here. I drew out some really basic road frames, leaving, just a couple little cul-de-sacs, leaving some room for paths as usual, so that, our citizens can walk freely throughout the city and then don't need to rely on cars so much. Anyway, we've been over that kind of stuff before. And then I also kept it simple with the actual zoning itself. Yeah, see here I go through and take a look at exactly what we need before we hit that next milestone. But as far as zoning goes, I also left that simple. I didn't throw in any district styles or anything. I just left it completely vanilla base game. And yeah, I just wanted to start building a new suburb so that we can start expanding to these parts of the map in the future. I'm still not sure which tile I would like to go to next and what build I want to do next at this point. Something in that area and something over there. But so if you have any suggestions for future builds, I would love to hear some suggestions. Sometimes, again, I think I've said this before, I do occasionally run out of ideas. And all it takes is just like hearing somebody's idea or seeing somebody's, and I'm like, oh, you know what, that'd be great. I wonder what my take on that thing would be. So if you have suggestions for things that you would like to see in the city, please feel free to drop a comment below, and maybe we can build something that you guys actually want to see instead of just what I want to build. But yeah, we go back over here again to try to find these buildings, the right ones coming in. So these are the ones that I'm talking about. I think they're just like produce, essentially, in the actual game. But again, just a sprinkle of imagination, we can pretend that it's like a food stall. And so that is the vibe that I was going for, and I think it worked out well. Again, it just takes a little bit of patience, getting rid of those buildings that come in wrong and just waiting for the right one to come in. Otherwise, again, like I said, you can just use the Find It mod and save yourself a ton of trouble. That's definitely the easiest way to do it. And again, I'm pretty sure that's eventually what I do at the end, is just use Find It, because I got sick and tired of waiting. But otherwise, this is your life for an hour or so, is just playing whack-a-mole on those buildings, trying to get the right one. But that is actually the main part of the build. I think it turned out pretty well, and I think the only thing that's missing now is making it look a little bit more complete and on purpose. So for that, we need a little bit of decoration. So I think now is as good a time as any to jump into a detailing time-lapse. So I'm going to go ahead and finish just sort of making this area look a little bit more full and fill in some of this empty space, fill in some of the residential zoning areas, and just decorate everything up. And once I'm finished with that, we can see the final results. Alright, so that does it for the build itself. I really just went through and detailed up some of the festival area very simply. I didn't want too many trees or too many things going on because, again, people are supposed to be watching the concert from back here. But I did go through and throw in some of the restrooms from our regular park areas, and then as well as some outhouses from the nature reserve parks. I thought it was interesting that the nature reserve doesn't actually come with any restrooms. And I realized that maybe the both of them combined is a little bit much. But I kept them in anyway, the regular restrooms, as sort of like maybe they're private suites. You know, where the rich people can go, who have those nice fancy seats in front, can go into like a nice air-conditioned area and have food and all kinds of fun stuff. So I decided to leave them both in there. But other than that, I had a really fun time sort of detailing this area up and creating this venue. I love festivals, so I really enjoyed having the opportunity to finally put one in my city. I'm actually a little bit surprised it's taken me so long to put one in. But again, I really had a great time with this build. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And then I also finally decided to detail up a little bit of my highway system. I've pretty much ignored detailing any of my road networks thus far, and it's starting to become a problem because I'm branching out further and further along the freeway, and it all just looks very bare. So I finally wanted to go in and throw in some trees and rocks and make it all look a little bit nicer and give it a little bit more purpose. And then going back into our neighborhood, I kept everything pretty simple. Again, no special district style or anything like that going on in there. I kept it totally bare, like base game stuff. But yeah, that is really it. I didn't do anything special with the neighborhood. The bulk of the build was, of course, setting up this area and getting in those specific buildings on the side for our food court area. Did a little bit of prop detailing on the sides to create like little seating areas for people as they go there and eat. But yeah, that does it for today's build. I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, I had a great time building it. If you did enjoy it, feel free to leave a like below, comment your favorite part, any suggestions or feedback on the build, and any other comments and suggestions you'd like for the rest of the city. As always, I totally appreciate any likes and comments, so if you have some feedback and ideas for the city yourself that you would love to see, feel free to leave them in the comments below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.